She was just the cleaning lady until she soothed the crying baby like a mother, and the father saw everything. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The elevator's digital display climbed slowly, floor by floor, as if it knew Emily Dawson didn't belong in that world. The building was a mirrored tower in the Upper West Side, wrapped in silence, pale marble, and floral arrangements that looked like they were changed every few hours. Emily kept her eyes fixed on the polished metal doors, gripping the strap of the cleaning supply bag the agency had handed her that morning. She'd left Bushwick before sunrise, still not used to the stark contrast between neighborhoods, or the way the receptionists had looked at her as if she were lost. The apartment was 1604. She double-checked the number on the folded paper in her coat pocket and took a deep breath before stepping out. The hallway was so quiet it felt unused. Thick carpet, doors with digital locks, recessed lighting, and a subtle lavender scent. Emily couldn't say exactly what made her uncomfortable, but there was something unsettling about such flawless order. She keyed in the code and waited for the soft click of the lock. The door opened, revealing an apartment so pristine it looked like a showroom. The space was open and bright, decorated in soft tones and clean lines. Light gray, creamy white, pale wood, natural fabrics. Emily stepped in cautiously, like someone afraid to disturb the balance of a place that wasn't theirs. There was no clutter, no sign of rush. Everything seemed overly clean. The agency had told her this was just a maintenance job. She started with the living room, vacuumed carefully, wiped the surfaces at a steady pace, always focused, never attached. But as she finished the first room, she froze. A high-pitched, persistent sound was coming from upstairs. Then it came again, a baby crying, clear, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. No one had told her there was a child in the home. And that cry didn't sound casual. It was the kind of crying that had stopped expecting an answer. Her heart raced. Emily followed the sound up the spiral staircase, driven by an impulse she didn't recognize but couldn't ignore. At the end of the upstairs hall, one door was ajar. Emily pushed it gently. Inside was a nursery. Pale pink walls, light wood furniture, soft light filtered through automatic blinds. The space didn't match the rest of the apartment. It was warm, lived in, intimate. In the center of the room, inside a sturdy crib, a little girl was crying hard, eyes shut, fists clenched. Emily didn't think. She simply stepped forward, leaned down, and picked her up. The crying stopped instantly. Like a switch had been flipped, the baby stared at her with big, dark eyes, eyes that seemed to recognize something. "Shh. It's okay, little one," Emily whispered, surprised by the sound of her own voice. It came from somewhere deep, an old reflex resurfacing without warning. She rocked the baby gently, feeling the warmth of that tiny body against her chest, the scent of baby powder and milk, the soft skin against her shirt. She didn't know the child's name, but something told her she had been chosen. Right then, right there. A man's voice came from the doorway. "What are you doing with my daughter?" Emily turned, startled, still holding the baby. He looked exhausted, mid-30s, dark, messy hair, unshaven, an unbuttoned dress shirt and tailored slacks. His posture was composed, but his eyes showed the strain of sleepless nights. Emily tried to explain, stumbling over her words. She said she was with the cleaning crew, had heard the crying, had come to check. He walked slowly into the room, eyes locked on his daughter, who was now asleep on Emily's shoulder, her head nestled in, peaceful. "She stopped," he said, almost in disbelief. "She never stops crying." Emily had no words. She just kept rocking gently. "What's your name?" he asked, still watching. "Emily Dawson," she said. He nodded. "I'm Ryan Whitaker, and this is my daughter, Sophie." Ryan spoke as if he needed to justify something to himself. He told her Sophie's mother had passed shortly after giving birth. Since then, nothing had worked. 3 nannies had quit. 2 pediatricians had tried to help. The baby wouldn't sleep, wouldn't take a bottle, wouldn't stop crying. Until now, he said more quietly, Emily offered a simple thought. Sometimes all a baby needs is someone to really hold them. Ryan looked at her with a mix of surprise and relief. Emily wasn't sure if she'd crossed a line, but the way Sophie clung to her said more than any explanation could. "Do you have kids?" he asked. "No," Emily replied, "but I raised 2 younger brothers, since they were little." The honesty in her voice made Ryan look away, as if touched by something he didn't want to revisit. The silence between them wasn't awkward, just a blank space between 2 worlds that weren't meant to meet. Ryan said he had some calls to make and asked her to finish the cleaning as planned before leaving. As she was about to go, he called out, "Emily!" She turned. "Thank you." She didn't reply, but she felt that word meant more than just politeness. Emily stayed with Sophie in her arms a few minutes longer, seated in the rocking chair next to the crib. Once she was sure the baby was breathing softly, eyes closed, body relaxed, she laid her down gently. Tucked in the blanket, ran her fingers over the baby's hair like it had always been part of her day. Before leaving, she looked around the room once more. For some reason she couldn't yet explain, it felt like home. Then she walked downstairs quietly, finished the cleaning, and left. The bench was still cold when Emily Dawson sat on the 6:30 a.m. train, holding her coffee cup with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The sun had barely risen over the tracks between Bushwick and Manhattan, and a layer of fog blanketed the city in a muted haze, making the trip to Midtown feel even more hushed. Emily had barely slept, not because of physical exhaustion, but because the baby's face, the way Sophie had melted into her chest without hesitation, lingered in her mind like a quiet presence. That wasn't the cry of hunger or gas. It was a different kind of absence, a need for touch, for connection, for comfort. And Emily knew that void. She'd seen it in her younger brothers, in neighborhood kids dropped off at daycare before dawn, and in herself. The call from the agency came early. The client from the day before had specifically requested her again. No explanation was given, just that payment would be handled directly, and the address was the same. Emily found it unusual, but she didn't ask questions. When she arrived at the Upper West Side building, the dissonance hit again. But this time, Ryan Whitaker was the one waiting at the door. He opened it himself, a simple act, but unexpected. Men like him usually waited for someone to open doors for them. He wore a plain white shirt and dark jeans, his expression carrying a restrained fatigue. "Punctuality is a rare virtue," he said, stepping aside to let her in. Emily greeted him with a quiet, "Good morning, sir," and crossed the threshold with a strange familiarity, even though she'd only entered that space for the first time the day before. The same scent hung in the air, freshly cleaned wood, something elusive like a suspended memory. As she placed her cleaning supplies in the corner of the living room, Ryan watched her. "Emily, we need to talk." For a moment she thought something had gone wrong, that he regretted her holding Sophie, that he'd changed his mind. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Ryan shook his head. "Actually, something's right. You did what no one else has." They sat across from each other in the living room. The table between them held only a remote and a closed book. Ryan spoke carefully, like every word was part of a contract. "Since she came home, she hasn't slept more than 2 hours. Refuses, bottles, cries constantly. 4 nannies quit. Doctors keep saying it's normal, adjustment, colic, or some vague theory that means nothing. But yesterday, you came in, picked her up, and she smiled, then slept for hours, peacefully. Emily listened quietly. "So here's what I want to propose." She hadn't seen that coming. "You work for me directly, as Sophie's caregiver." Emily didn't answer right away. Ryan continued, "It's full time. You'd live here, have your own room, visit family whenever you need. The salary is 3 times what the agency pays." She folded her hands in her lap, taking it all in. No one had ever offered her something like this. But it wasn't just the offer. It was how he said it, as if he were asking for help, not just hiring someone. "Can I see her?" she asked. Ryan's answer was a nod. He led her upstairs. Sophie was awake, eyes fixed on the mobile above her crib. When she saw Emily, she made a short, bright sound. Emily walked over naturally, picked her up, and the baby fit into her arms like it was instinct. Ryan stood for a few moments, watching. "Why are you doing this?" Emily asked, still looking at the baby. "Because she chose you," he said. "I'd really like you to care for her. What do you think?" The answer came instantly. "Yes," Emily said. "Yes, I can take care of her." Even she was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Ryan looked at her more directly. "I'm not asking for miracles, just someone who looks at her the way you're looking at her now." Emily tilted her head slightly. "And the schedule?" "Flexible. The only rule is to take good care of her. Keep me updated, and remember, I'm her father. I make the final call. If you need to handle something outside, I'll provide a trusted nanny to cover you." Emily nodded. It wasn't a relationship of equals, but one of shared responsibility. "There's one more thing," he said. "I work too much. Sometimes I travel. You'll be alone with her occasionally." Emily glanced around, as if mentally reassessing everything. "That doesn't scare me," she said. "Taking care of someone has never been the hard part." Ryan didn't answer right away. He just watched Sophie slowly doze off in Emily's arms. And in that moment, everything was already settled. 2 hours later, Emily stood in the elevator with her bag, certain she'd be returning with her suitcases the next day. Stepping out of the building, the strangeness of the day before no longer clung to her. The address was still one of the most expensive in New York, the building unchanged, but something in her had shifted. She took the train back to Bushwick, her mind full of images. Ryan's voice, the way he'd looked at Sophie, how the baby curled into her chest. Back at the small apartment she shared with 2 roommates, she cooked dinner calmly, set aside the clothes for the next day, folding them neatly over a chair. She went to bed early, her mind quietly spinning. The room Emily moved into the next day was downstairs, close to the office Ryan used when he worked from home. It was larger than the entire apartment she shared in Bushwick. Pale walls, a firm mattress, built-in closet, and a desk near the window gave the space a calm, welcoming feel. There were no pictures, no personal touches. Everything was clean, new, and practical. On the shelf beside the bed, a box with a handwritten label bore her name. Inside, packaged bed linens, plush towels, unopened toiletries. Emily ran her hand over the comforter, almost needing to confirm this wasn't temporary. She left her suitcase in the corner and spent the next few minutes testing the lamp, opening drawers, feeling the closet doors. It was her way of getting oriented, of understanding if she truly belonged there. Ryan appeared around 9, holding Sophie. The baby was alert, curious, her eyes scanning the room. Emily stepped forward and took her with natural ease, as if her arms already knew the routine. "She woke up earlier today and didn't cry," Ryan said, sounding genuinely surprised. Emily just offered a brief smile as Sophie clutched the collar of her shirt. "Could you walk me through her routine? Meals, naps, everything?" Ryan nodded, and they went to the kitchen. The table was set with an open notebook, pages filled in blue ink. There was structure, but also signs of improvisation. "She eats, but won't take the bottle from anyone but me. I've tried everything." Emily read each note carefully, suggested a few changes, shared some thoughts. Ryan listened without rushing, without interrupting, like he was finally making room for someone else in his daughter's life. The morning flowed smoothly. Emily prepared Sophie's food, checked the temperature on her wrist, and fed her slowly, watching every reaction. Sophie ate well, letting out soft sounds between spoonfuls. Across the counter, Ryan kept his laptop open but barely typed. He was watching them more than working, his gaze trying to decipher what made this all work. When the meal ended, Emily carried Sophie upstairs, carefully taking the same curved staircase she'd used on her first day. The nursery was tidy, toys placed neatly, and a soft rug covered part of the floor. Emily sat in the armchair, waiting as the baby fell asleep. She didn't rush out. She adjusted the blanket, watched the baby's breathing, gently brushed her fine hair. Only then did she return downstairs to finish household tasks, her steps sure, her movements calm, like the space was already adjusting to her. That night, Emily ate alone. Ryan had left for a meeting, leaving a quick message saying dinner would be delivered. The food arrived precisely on time: warm salad, artisan bread, a light dessert. Emily ate in the kitchen, a soft instrumental playlist drifting from hidden ceiling speakers. She was in a place far removed from where she came from, yet nothing felt out of place. After dinner, she washed the dishes, mentally reviewed the day, and went upstairs to check on Sophie. The baby was still asleep, turned slightly on her side, peaceful. Emily stood there for a while, simply watching. Then she returned to her room, changed into an oversized t-shirt, tied her hair up, and sat on the bed with the agency notebook. She noted the day's schedule, reactions, small observations. She did it to ensure consistency. By 11, she was in bed. The sheets still smelled like new. She left the door slightly ajar, just as she always did. Ryan returned after midnight. He entered quietly, took off his coat in the hallway, and went straight to Sophie's room. He spent a few minutes there. The baby was sleeping peacefully, her cloth toy tucked under one arm. The room was in order, and everything showed the day had gone as planned. On the dresser, he found Emily's notebook. He read it silently. The notes were clear, simple, attentive observations, responses to the meal, signs of tiredness, ideal nap times. At the bottom, a small line read, "During lunch, she didn't turn her head away once." Ryan read it, closed the notebook slowly, and stood watching the crib for a moment longer. Then he left and went to his room. Emily didn't hear him. She was fast asleep, body relaxed against the mattress, her expression calm. Her alarm was set for 6:45. She always woke up before it. The next morning, Emily made breakfast. Black coffee. For him, toast with jam for her. She arranged everything on the counter, sliced the bread, and turned on the kettle. Ryan appeared with damp hair, a light shirt on, jacket draped over his arm. "You're an early riser," he said, not expecting a reply. Emily poured the coffee and pointed out the sugar. Sophie was still asleep, and the kitchen felt suspended. Between two worlds, the quiet opulence of a luxury apartment and the unspoken rhythm of a home, where breakfast simply marks the start of the day. They sat together in silence, sharing the meal with the ease of two people, slowly building a routine. When he finished, Ryan straightened his shirt, fixed the cuffs, and said just before leaving, "Thank you for yesterday." Emily looked at him, unsure which part he was referring to. Maybe the care she gave his daughter, maybe how everything had stayed balanced, or maybe just for being there. A little after 11 in the morning, the intercom buzzed. Emily was organizing Sophie's schedule notebook when she heard the doorman announce that a delivery had arrived for apartment 1604. She tied her hair back with the elastic on her wrist, put on her sneakers, and went downstairs. The delivery man was waiting with a large rectangular box sealed with light blue ribbon and a tag bearing the baby's name. Emily signed for it and thanked him. Back in the apartment, she opened the package and found a modern stroller, lightweight, foldable, with refined finishing. Alongside it, there was a short note from Ryan. "If the day's nice, Sophie deserves some fresh air." She glanced out the window and froze for a second. The sky was clear, sunlight spilling through the curtains. It wasn't just a suggestion. It was a subtle gesture that made her feel she was allowed to belong there too. That afternoon, as the sun warmed the streets of the Upper West Side, she got Sophie ready, adjusted her blanket, dressed her in a white cardigan, and slipped on her tiny shoes. The wide sidewalks made the contrast with the worn streets of Bushwick unmistakable. Emily walked attentively, sensing some glances in her direction, but none seemed judgmental. A few mothers passed by, pushing strollers or guiding small children by the hand. There was a stillness in the air. She stopped in front of a bakery with wide, elegant windows, bought a glossy pastry and a fresh juice, and sat down at one of the outdoor tables. Sophie was awake, her eyes following the movement of the tree leaves. Emily handed her a small rattle, adjusted the baby's hat, and leaned back, watching the cars go by with less noise than usual. Time felt slower there. When they returned to the building, the sky was starting to change color. Emily took Sophie upstairs, changed her diaper, warmed the milk, and organized the nursery with a sense of ease. The new stroller stayed by the front hall, as if it had always been a part of the home. Ryan arrived early in the evening. He had his work folder in one hand and a calmer look than in previous days. He found Emily in the kitchen, Sophie in her arms, stirring a pot of chopped vegetables. He paused at the doorway, watching for a few seconds before asking, "Did you like the stroller?" Emily responded with a simple, "Yes, very practical." He didn't say anything else, just handed her a small pharmacy bag with organic baby food and a new pacifier. "I saw these at the drugstore. Thought they might come in handy." Emily put everything away without commenting. After dinner, he cleared the dishes while she cleaned the counter. Sophie was asleep in the portable crib near the living room, covered by the light blanket Emily always adjusted when the air shifted. The space was calm, without deep conversations, but the gestures were starting to take on meaning. Ryan stayed in the kitchen drying dishes, watching Emily as she filled in the notebook with the day's details. When she closed it, he said, not fully turning toward her, "She was smiling when I got home today. I hadn't seen that in a while." Emily simply looked at him in silence. But something about that remark touched her in a different way. She replied with a brief look, then sat by the crib, adjusting the blanket over Sophie's tiny body. Ryan stepped closer and kissed his daughter's head, a restrained but affectionate gesture. Emily shifted slightly to give him space but stayed nearby. He sat on the other end of the couch, his body subtly angled toward her. "It still feels strange seeing someone else take care of her, but with you, it doesn't feel like I'm handing off responsibility. It just feels like she has someone else looking after her." Emily didn't answer. Not because she didn't have anything to say, but because that moment felt like it only needed to be taken in. She looked at Sophie, sleeping peacefully, one little hand stretched over her chest like she was holding an invisible thread of comfort. That night, Emily stayed there longer, sitting near the crib, watching Sophie sleep, while Ryan finished up what was left in the kitchen. She only got up when he quietly suggested she go upstairs to rest. It didn't sound like a request. It felt more like a gesture of care. When Emily entered the bedroom, she slowly took off her shoes, went to the bathroom, washed her face, tied her hair back, and slipped on her nightgown. The penthouse was silent. The dark room with the curtains drawn felt different now. The bed no longer seemed unfamiliar. The scent of the sheets was becoming familiar. She lay down without turning on the lights, her body tired, her head full of small images, Sophie babbling in the breeze, Ryan bringing things from the pharmacy without being asked, the two of them naturally sharing the household tasks. None of these scenes felt special on their own, but together they were beginning to shape something new. The next morning, Emily woke up early. She prepared Sophie's first bottle and then set up a simple breakfast tray for herself. She sat by the window, looking out at the city covered in a soft autumn haze. Sophie was playing with a piece of cloth on the rug, making little sounds and smiling easily. Emily got down beside her, and the two shared that moment of quiet warmth, laughter, and spontaneous gestures. When Ryan appeared in the hallway, shirt still unbuttoned and hair damp, he stopped when he saw them. He watched for a few seconds and then continued toward the bedroom, just nodding. She returned the gesture with a faint smile. By lunchtime, the atmosphere already felt shared. Emily was chopping vegetables, Ryan slicing fruit, and Sophie babbling in her high chair. He mentioned the market that had reopened on the corner, and she replied with a few simple questions. After they finished eating, Ryan walked around the living room with Sophie in his arms while Emily tidied up. For the first time, the apartment didn't feel formal. A few toys were out of place. The living room showed signs of daily life, and the house itself felt fuller. Later in the afternoon, while putting away clean baby clothes, Emily noticed that some of the pieces were already folded in the drawer. Ryan was learning the rhythm, and she understood that without a word. It was just another quiet sign that little by little, their routine was starting to shift. The day began under New York's pale autumn sky, with thin clouds blanketing the tall buildings of the Upper West Side. Emily was already in the kitchen, preparing Sophie's bottle while checking the time on the wall clock. It was early, but she preferred it that way. Getting the morning in order gave her a sense of control that made the rest of the day feel manageable. As the milk warmed, she mentally ran through her list. Review the grocery items, wash the baby's smaller clothes, set aside what no longer fit. Ryan hadn't left yet. She could hear him walking down the hallway. Sophie was awake too, playing in her crib with a silicone toy. Emily organized the first diaper change, the bath, and picked out a soft outfit for the day. The routine no longer felt tiring. There was something comforting in the repetition. Ryan walked in, wearing an unbuttoned dress shirt and slacks. He moved straight through the living room and into the kitchen, where Emily was slicing fruit for Sophie's snack. He quickly mentioned an important meeting and asked if she needed anything from outside. Emily said no. These brief exchanges were becoming more common. When he left, he forgot his phone on the counter. She noticed, but simply moved it closer to the fruit bowl so he'd see it later. Sophie, lying on a colorful rug, watched Emily's movements closely. She smiled when she saw her caregiver crouch down and let out a cheerful noise. It wasn't quite a bond yet, but there was already a familiarity between them. Emily felt reassured every time she saw that smile. It told her she was doing something right. Later that morning, with Sophie asleep, Emily took the chance to tidy up her room. She folded clothes, set some aside for washing, and changed the sheets. She no longer felt like a guest. The space was different from what she was used to, but it wasn't unwelcoming. For years, she'd lived surrounded by thin walls and the constant noise of neighbors. Now there was room to breathe. When Sophie woke up, Emily prepared the scheduled meal, carefully observing portion sizes and timing. After the baby's lunch, they went out to the balcony. Emily sat in a low lounge chair with Sophie on her lap, and they stayed there for a while, watching the clear sky and listening to the distant hum of the city. Sophie waved her arms, trying to reach a shadow moving along the wall beside them. Early in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Emily answered it with damp hands from the dishes. It was the part-time nanny, the same one mentioned in Ryan's original agreement. He had scheduled her visit so Emily could take care of personal matters. It wasn't a surprise, but she had nearly forgotten. She left written instructions, changed clothes, and headed out. She stopped by her old neighborhood, picked up some clothes she had left with a neighbor, and retrieved a forgotten item from the laundromat. Before returning, she entered a store and bought a new outfit for Sophie, made of soft fabric in a delicate color. It wasn't essential, but she felt like doing it. When she got back, the nanny was sitting on the rug with Sophie in her lap, singing a children's song. Emily thanked her, received a quick rundown of the last few hours, and resumed care with ease. Sophie accepted her arms without hesitation, as if that embrace had become part of the routine. After putting away the shopping, Emily sat on the living room rug and read to the baby. The apartment was quiet. Ryan arrived later than usual and found them there. Sophie was standing, supported by Emily, trying to steady her feet. When she saw him, she let out a loud, excited sound. He smiled, picked her up and asked, "Already trying to walk?" Emily just nodded, and he said she looked more active. Before ending the day, Emily prepared the final bottle. Ryan held Sophie in his arms, rocking her gently. Emily paused at the doorway, watching for a moment before heading back to the kitchen. When she returned, he was still there, the baby now asleep against his chest. Without saying a word, Emily turned off the hallway light and went upstairs. The dark room no longer felt unfamiliar. The bed felt like hers now. The scent of the sheets was familiar. She lay down, body tired, her mind full of images, Ryan buying things without being asked, the baby smiling, the three of them sharing the same space naturally. None of these moments were grand, but together they were becoming part of something bigger. The next morning, she woke up early and made breakfast, Sophie's bottle, a simple tray for herself. She sat by the window overlooking the city, now veiled in a light autumn mist. Sophie played on the rug, babbling words only she understood. Emily knelt beside her, and they spent time together in a peaceful quiet, exchanging smiles and gentle touches. When Ryan appeared, shirt half-buttoned and hair damp, he stopped at the sight of them. He nodded, received a soft smile in return, and continued to the bedroom. At lunchtime, the atmosphere felt easy. Emily was chopping vegetables, Ryan was slicing fruit, and Sophie babbled from her high chair. After the meal, he walked around the living room with the baby in his arms while Emily cleared the table. The home felt different. Toys were scattered, the living room showed signs of everyday life. And in Sophie's dresser, there were freshly folded clothes she hadn't put there. Ryan was learning, and she knew it without needing a single word. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, and Emily took advantage of the early hours to tidy up the apartment before Sophie woke up. Her movements had become part of a quiet routine, folding a blanket, straightening the baby's things, setting the room in order for the start of the day. Ryan was still in the bedroom, maybe reading, maybe simply extending his moment of rest. By the time Sophie made her first sounds, Emily had already warmed the bottle and laid out her clothes for the day. She went to the crib, greeted by the baby's spontaneous smile, and handled the morning care with calm attention. The bath was quick, the clothes soft and comfortable, and after feeding, they went down to the living room, where sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a warm, peaceful light over the space. Ryan showed up shortly after, barefoot and holding a mug of coffee. Sophie reached out for him without hesitation, and he picked her up, making a quick comment about her new outfit. It was something Emily had bought a few days earlier, chosen more for the softness of the fabric than the look. The three of them sat together for a while, surrounded by scattered toys and moments of quiet that didn't need filling. When Ryan mentioned he'd be going out that afternoon and that the nanny would arrive at 3, Emily simply nodded. She wasn't required to leave, but she wasn't going to miss the opportunity either. With everything in order, Emily walked through streets that still felt new to her. She stopped by 2 stores without intending to buy anything, glanced at a flower stand, nearly picked up a bouquet. She stepped into a stationery shop, chose a new notebook, then continued to a small bakery. She ordered coffee and buttered bread, sat by the window, and watched the flow of passers-by. Her mind wandered back to the days when she counted coins, split meals in half, and carried grocery bags across long city blocks. Now there was space to breathe. She returned to the apartment in the late afternoon, her hair loose, her cheeks flushed from the wind. Sophie was still sleeping. The nanny, already on her way out, handed her a small note with the baby's schedule. Ryan was in the kitchen, brewing coffee. When he saw her, he slid a second mug toward her. Emily accepted it and sat at the counter. They stayed like that for a few minutes. He mentioned a children's bookstore and the idea of putting together a small bookshelf for Sophie. Emily suggested a few titles from her own childhood, and he jotted them down. He asked if she'd like to go with him to the store sometime that week. It sounded practical, straightforward, but there was something more to it. She replied that she'd check her schedule. He said he'd follow up. Later, with Sophie playing on the rug, Emily sat beside her and began organizing a box of toys. Ryan was on the sofa, phone in hand, but his eyes were fixed on her. Emily noticed. She didn't say anything. She played with the baby, who laughed loudly, and that sound softened the room. When evening came, Ryan said he was heading upstairs early. Emily picked up the toys, bathed Sophie, and put her to bed. Then she went upstairs too. As she lay down, she wasn't thinking about what could come next. She was only aware that little by little, the apartment was no longer just a place to work. It was becoming a space where she truly felt seen. Monday began with a light rain and a pale grey light filtering through the wide windows of the apartment. Emily woke early, as usual. But Sophie was still sleeping when she went to the kitchen to prepare coffee. She set aside fruit for breakfast, checked the baby's clothes for the day, and quietly tidied up the space. Ryan appeared shortly after, his hair still damp from the shower, and greeted her in a soft voice. He mentioned he had a meeting out of town and wouldn't be back until late. The nanny would arrive in the afternoon, as she usually did, when he needed to be away for extended periods. Emily nodded lightly and carried on with the morning routine. She spent time with Sophie on the rug in the living room, surrounded by colorful toys, while the baby giggled, babbled, and tried to fit pieces together with her small hands. Their bond didn't need to be spoken aloud. It had been carefully built day after day. In the afternoon, while the nanny cared for Sophie, Emily went out for routine checkups and took the opportunity to walk around the neighborhood. When she returned in the early evening, the apartment was quiet. The nanny was on her way out, Sophie was ready for bed, and Emily was closing the living room blinds when Ryan walked in. They had dinner with the simple meals he'd brought home. Emily cleaned the counter, and he put the silverware away. The conversation was brief, but their familiar gestures carried a quiet understanding. When Ryan prepared the bottle, she watched silently. He knew exactly how to warm it, how much water to add, how to test the temperature on the back of his hand. It wasn't just routine. It was familiarity. The next morning during breakfast, Ryan mentioned he'd been invited to a reception on Thursday. The event was being hosted by a group of investors, and although he didn't particularly enjoy those gatherings, sometimes it was necessary to attend. Emily listened while slicing fruit for Sophie, calm and unhurried. He wasn't sure if he would go, but he wanted her to know. He put on his jacket and left shortly after. The rest of the day unfolded with the same steady rhythm. Emily took Sophie out for a short walk, picked up fruit and diapers, and once home, used the baby's nap time to reorganize the bookshelf they'd started putting together. She wiped down the shelves and selected 2 books she planned to read aloud to Sophie that evening. Small rituals were beginning to take shape. Dinner was quiet. Ryan texted to say he was stuck in a meeting. Emily ate alone, with Sophie already asleep in the nursery. She left the radio on, cleaned the kitchen, and went upstairs late after putting everything away. She paused by the baby's crib, adjusted the blanket, and stood still for a moment watching Sophie's peaceful breathing. As she lay in bed, her thoughts drifted to Ryan, not as the man who had hired her, but as someone whose presence lingered in the smallest parts of the day. The shared silences, the way he held Sophie, the way he listened without rushing. It stayed with her. On Wednesday, Ryan brought up the reception again. He had confirmed he would attend, but said he didn't plan to stay long. Emily noticed a pause in his tone, something unsaid, but let it pass. Later, he took Sophie out for a walk on his own, something he hadn't done before. They returned with a small bouquet of flowers, which he said was Sophie's pick, drawn to the colors. At dinner, the flowers sat on the table. Emily moved the vase to avoid the scent interfering with the food. Ryan watched her, then brought up small talk. The conversation flowed easily, without rush. On Thursday, Ryan got ready slowly. Before leaving, he called Emily over. He said he would only stop by the event as a formality and wouldn't stay long. She asked if he needed anything. He said no. As he was leaving, he touched her shoulder lightly with his fingers. Emily stood at the closed door for a few seconds before turning back to the bedroom. Sophie was asleep. She turned off the hallway. Light wiped down the kitchen counter, checked the locks, and looked out the window. The city lights flickered in the distance. Inside, something had begun to stir. She didn't put a name to what she felt, but she could tell. It wasn't the same anymore. The next morning arrived without any noticeable changes. Emily was already up before 7, moving through the kitchen with the same calm gestures as always, while soft light filtered through the apartment's wide windows. Sophie was still asleep upstairs, and a quiet stillness settled across the rooms, something Emily was starting to recognize as familiar. She prepared the coffee carefully, adjusted her apron, and set aside some of Sophie's clothes that were starting to get too small, thinking she'd donate them soon. When she went upstairs, she found Sophie awake, playing with her socks in the crib. The baby's spontaneous smile brought a lightness to the start of the day. After the bottle, they came downstairs together. Ryan had left early, with a note on the counter indicating what time he'd be back. With the apartment all to themselves, Emily took Sophie up to the rooftop terrace, a space they hadn't explored together yet. The garden up there was well maintained, with large pots, small trees, and a wooden bench under a glass canopy. She spread a blanket on the ground and sat with the baby in her lap, enjoying the fresh air and the open view of the buildings. Sophie giggled at the sight of the leaves swaying in the wind, reaching out instinctively. Emily smiled too, surprised by how much those quiet moments with her made her feel good. There was no longer any effort to adjust. The bond between them was clear. When the sun grew warmer, they returned indoors with flushed cheeks and an easy calm. After lunch, while Sophie napped upstairs, Emily decided to reorganize a bookshelf in the living room. The books were mixed with various objects, and she liked bringing a sense of order. She separated the children's titles, wiped the shelves, rearranged the decorations, and avoided touching the framed photos that seemed older. When she finished, the space felt more balanced. Sitting with Sophie on the rug afterward, once the baby woke up, felt like a natural continuation of her care. That's what she did every day: tend, arrange, be present. And even if no one had asked or noticed the changes on the shelf, Emily felt like she truly belonged there. Ryan got home a little after 8. He dropped his briefcase by the entryway and walked through the living room with his shoulders slightly slumped. Emily was preparing a simple soup, and the aroma had already filled the air. He gave her a long, grateful look before heading off to change. When he came back, he was in a t-shirt and sweats with Sophie in his arms. The baby was excited to see him and settled quickly. Emily watched from the kitchen, a dish towel still in her hand, a quiet warmth rising in her chest. They ate dinner in peace. Ryan talked a bit about his day, mentioned meetings, and noticed the newly organized bookshelf. Emily just said she'd had a little free time. The conversation was short, but genuinely attentive, a kind of mutual awareness that required no effort. After dinner, while she washed the dishes, Ryan stayed in the living room with Sophie. He spoke to the baby in a low voice, showing her toys and laughing at her reactions. Emily could hear the sounds while rinsing plates, and the way those little noises filled the space felt different. When she finished, she returned to the living room. Ryan said he had some documents to finish and headed upstairs. Emily stayed with Sophie on the rug, helped her change into her pajamas, and soothed her with a soft lullaby. Once Sophie fell asleep, she gently laid her in the crib, picked up the toys, and turned off the lights. She was tired, but her thoughts were still active. That house, that rhythm, the way Ryan looked at her and spoke, it was all beginning to take up a new place inside her. In the bedroom, Emily lay down slowly. The city was still alive outside, with distant horns and glowing windows, but the apartment held everything she needed at that moment. She stayed there in silence, staring at the ceiling, breathing deeply. She didn't try to understand what she was feeling anymore or give it a name. She just knew she felt at home, and for now that was enough. The afternoon light fell gently over Manhattan, casting a soft glow and bringing cooler air than the previous days. Emily and Ryan walked side by side along quiet streets, pushing Sophie's stroller down wide sidewalks lined with small shop windows and neatly spaced trees. Emily carried a bag with fruit and a few essentials, her eyes often drifting to Sophie, who alternated between curious stares and restless little hand movements. Ryan matched her pace naturally, pushing the stroller with ease. They didn't talk much during the walk, but the silence between them felt comfortable. At a flower stand, Ryan picked out a small bouquet of lavender and handed it to her without a word. Emily accepted it with a subtle smile and stored the gesture in her memory. Back at the apartment, with Sophie still awake and full of energy, Ryan suggested they have dinner together. Emily agreed easily. They cooked something simple, sharing tasks, chopping vegetables, tossing a salad, stirring the rice. Laughter broke out here and there, and when Ryan reached for something on the shelf and brushed Emily's shoulder, the touch felt casual, natural. Sophie played on the living room rug, and everything about their routine felt lighter. During dinner, Ryan poured white wine and, watching his daughter, remarked on how fast she was growing. Emily responded with a soft comment of her own, and the conversation lingered in that gentle tone until the last bite. Once Sophie was settled into her portable crib, the two of them remained in the kitchen, sitting side by side at the counter. Ryan offered her another cup of tea, and she accepted. The conversation turned to her childhood, simple stories about her siblings and the backyard where she grew up. Ryan shared that he only learned to cook after losing his parents, and that living alone for so long had forced him to figure things out. Neither of them was trying to stir emotion. They were just talking, sharing. The way he looked at her between sentences caught her attention, though there was no clear intention behind it. Emily noticed, but didn't say anything. Time seemed to slow between those quiet exchanges. At bedtime, Emily whispered a soft, "Thank you." Ryan walked her to the bedroom door. There was no rush, no formality, just the two of them, standing, face to face, free from roles, contracts, or expectations. When he leaned in, the kiss happened naturally. It was quick but certain. Their lips met in a restrained gesture, and both remained quiet afterward. Emily stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her, standing still for a moment before walking to the bed. Ryan lingered in the hallway, his eyes fixed on the pale wood of the closed door. Emily took a while to fall asleep. The kiss played on a loop in her mind, too fresh to ignore. But it didn't carry guilt or confusion. It had been unexpected, but real. She wasn't trying to define it or explain it. As the apartment quieted around her, only that moment remained, the memory of the touch, the brief warmth, the look that followed. And even without knowing what it meant, she knew she didn't want to forget it. The next morning, Ryan left early. He'd written a note and left it on the counter, saying he'd be in meetings all day. There was no mention of the previous night. Emily read the note, folded it carefully, and slipped it into her apron pocket. She spent the day with Sophie, doing laundry, sorting toys, reorganizing the bookshelf. Everything in their routine looked the same, but Emily's thoughts kept circling back to that kiss. It was impossible to pretend it hadn't happened. And even though she didn't know what would come next, she already couldn't see Ryan the same way anymore. The day began like all the others, coffee prepared with care, Sophie still sleepy in her arms, and the house quiet. Emily went about her morning tasks, trying to keep her mind busy. The note Ryan had left the day before was still folded in the kitchen drawer, tucked between the dish towels. No new message had come in since then. She tried not to expect anything, but his silence weighed more heavily than she wanted to admit. The memory of the kiss, the light touch, and the way they had pulled away replayed often in her mind. She wasn't trying to find hidden meanings, but she couldn't pretend she hadn't felt something. Ryan didn't return until early evening. He looked visibly exhausted and spoke even less than usual. Emily noticed, but said nothing. She bathed Sophie, made the bottle, and went to her room early. They didn't have dinner together. She could hear his footsteps downstairs late into the night. The next morning, the air felt thick. Ryan thanked her for the coffee and made a quick comment about the baby's food before leaving, saying he had another long day ahead. Emily replied with a quiet, "Have a good day," and returned to her routine, Sophie in her arms. The following days brought fewer moments together. Ryan left before dawn and came home only after Sophie was already asleep. He was always polite but distant. He mentioned meetings and tight deadlines but offered no real details. Emily began to wonder if the kiss had been a mistake or if she had simply misread kindness for something deeper. But what she missed wasn't just the gesture. It was the easy conversations, the way he looked at Sophie, the comfort of shared silence. It wasn't just longing, it was the absence of everything that had made the apartment feel like a home. And in that absence, Emily began to realize how much she missed what they'd unknowingly built together. On Friday, just before sunset, Ryan walked in with a bag of bread and a tired expression. He found Emily on the floor with Sophie, who was trying to put a doll in her mouth. He sat down beside them without saying a word, just stayed there. Emily glanced at him briefly. It didn't feel like an explanation or an apology. It was just presence. When he quietly mentioned that they'd need to wash everything after the doll hit the floor, she gave a small smile. The air between them still felt heavy, but it no longer pressed down. Later, he suggested a simple dinner. Emily agreed. They prepared rice and vegetables, working side by side in the kitchen like they used to. There was no touching, no drawn-out conversations, but a sense of ease returned. With Sophie asleep, dinner was light, filled with small talk about the weather, routines, and the baby's habits. After cleaning up, Ryan paused at the stairs. He said the kiss hadn't been planned, that it had been spontaneous, but he didn't think it had been a mistake, that maybe he was more involved than he cared to admit. Emily didn't respond right away. She stood there, dish towel still in hand, absorbing his words. He didn't press, just went upstairs. She remained for a while before walking over to the window chair. She sat there watching the city lights scatter between the buildings. The trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. Her thoughts circled around what he had said. There were no promises, no grand gestures, just a quiet truth, spoken calmly. And for now, that was enough. In the days that followed, they began to talk more openly about Sophie, about the house, about themselves. They pushed away the hesitation with small gestures, rediscovering the comfort of their shared evenings. There were no dramatic declarations, just a mutual understanding that what they were building mattered. Emily was no longer just a constant in the house. She was part of the rhythm, the affection, the structure. And once she realized that, she could no longer picture the apartment without all three of them in it. The end. So what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying stories like this one. See you next time.